Hello, thank you for stopping by. My name is Becky and this is BecxReadz, and today I have another recommendation collab for you. Today, I, as well as some of my favorite booktubers, will be sharing with you some vampiric book recommendations. Hence the look. This is as vampiric as I get. Let me introduce to you the collaborators of today's video. We have Andy at BecxReadz, April at Happily Ever April, Crystal at Books Forever After, Jess at Honest Fiction, Kristin at Kristin Craves Books, and Tara at Tara Talks Books. All of these ladies' channels will be linked down below, as well as a playlist where you can find even more vampire book recommendations to check out. And with that out of the way, let's get into my recommendations for some vampire books. First up, I want to recommend to you a new adult paranormal thriller, I guess you would say. It is called Dark Reflections by Kelsey Ketch. In this, we are following a young woman named Alana who gets bit by the reflection of a vampire in this cursed mirror. And so she isolates herself on this island, and by day, she is her normal self. But at night, she is racking up the bodies of her victims because this spirit of this vampire takes control of her body. And one morning she wakes up and she finds this young man named Cole who is chained up in a shed on her island property, and she doesn't remember how he got there. So she is doing everything she can to sort of avoid him, especially at night when the vampire soul comes out, so that this vampire doesn't know how much he's starting to mean to her. But they end up getting closer over time, and Cole has to figure out a way to either expel this vampire from Alana's body or come to terms with his fate that he is going to die. So this was a really unique story. It was action-packed. It does have a little bit of romance in it, not a lot to the point where I would call it a romance, but it did have some darker elements to it, and I really enjoyed this. My next vampire book rec is a humorous paranormal romance, and that is How to Marry a Millionaire Vampire by Carolyn Sparks. This is book one in her Love at Stake series. Most of the books in this series do contain vampires, but some of the later books do contain like werewolf shifters and things like that. But in this book, we are following Roman, who is this very rich, charming, dashing billionaire of a vampire. And he lost one of his fangs biting into something he shouldn't have been biting into. So he needs to find himself a dentist, and he only has one night to do this, otherwise his natural healing tendencies will heal up the wound and he'll be a one-fanged vampire, which is kind of embarrassing. And in comes Shanna, who is a dentist who, she's not the best at her job because she doesn't like the sight of blood. But when she witnesses a murder by the mob, Roman comes to her rescue to save her, and thus their romantic relationship begins. I absolutely love this series. It's ridiculous, but it's so funny. It's so charming. The characters have great chemistry. From what I can remember, because it's been a long time since I've read this series, the steam was pretty good as well. But you just gotta go into this for a fun time and not take it too seriously because, like I said, the series is called Love at Stake. The title is How to Marry a Millionaire Vampire. You know it's gonna be quirky and fun. My next recommendation is an adult gothic retelling, and that is A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. This is a Dracula's Bride retelling about Constanta, who is our main character. She gets turned by Dracula when she is really young, and she is living her life through the centuries in this very toxic and abusive relationship with Dracula. So it's her story of her writing letters to him as she's maturing and realizing the abuse that she is suffering, as well as the people that he continuously brings in to their relationship and how she goes about getting out of it. This is a really short story. It's got some darker elements to it. It does explore, like I said, abusive relationships and the tolls that can take on people. This also has LGBT rep in it as well, if that is something you are interested in, so do check this one out. My next vampire recommendation is the very first adult romance I ever read. So it is a backlist series, but I still think it's worth reading, and that is Kiss of Midnight by Laura Adrian. This is book one in her Midnight Breed series about breed warriors who protect their kind and the unsuspecting humans from the vampires around them. And in this book, we are following Lucan, who is the leader of the breed, and he wants nothing to do with relationships. He just wants to do his job. But when Gabriella ends up, again, witnessing a murder, I see a theme here with girls witnessing murders and needing vampires to save them. He ends up unknowingly protecting a woman who carries the key to their species continuation in her DNA. The love matches in this series, all of the women who are eligible to bear children with these vampires, they all have a very specific tattoo on their body, which is really interesting. So, as I said, this was the very first adult romance that I ever read, and it hooked me on adult romances for the rest of my life. I would like to do a reread of it at some point because I love these characters so much. So I definitely think you should check this out if you are interested in it. My next vampiric recommendation is an adult historic fantasy, and that is The Lights of Prague by Nicole Jarvis. So this is the story of a man named Domek, who is a lamplighter in Prague by night and a vampire hunter by day. So at night he goes around and he lights the oil lamps of Prague, and by day he is hunting down the vampires that are terrorizing the city. But his dedication to being a vampire hunter is really put to the test when he discovers even more sinister things happening in Prague, and maybe the vampires aren't his biggest worry. And some vampires might not even be such bad people. So I really enjoyed this book for the historical fantasy elements. I loved the Prague setting. I loved that this had so many different paranormal creatures, from witches to vampires to will-o'-the-wisps. The audio narration of this book is spectacular. So this is one that if you are into historical fantasies, definitely recommend this. My next recommendation is a young adult fantasy, and that is Intertwined by Gina Showalter. Now, I do warn against this because this series never got completed. It does have 3 books out in the series, but sort of just leaves off on a cliffhanger that never gets solved. But these first 3 books, they still remain an addictive series for me to read. I actually reread it in 2020 because I thought about getting rid of them, and I enjoyed my time with them so much I still have them on my shelves. So in this, we were following a young man named Aiden who moves to this new town in Oklahoma where he's hoping for a fresh start. But Aiden has 4 other souls living in his brain. He had this ability when he was young where something happened and these 4 souls got sucked into his body. So he is living with these 4 very different souls in his head when he moves to this new town, and he's just trying to start fresh. But he sticks out like a sore thumb because these souls are attracting the attention of some paranormal creatures. From witches to shifters to vampires, they're all seeking Aiden out to understand and try and take back the souls that are in his head. Aiden's love interest is a vampire princess. His best friend is a girl who somehow amplifies his powers, and he befriends this werewolf. But if you like YA paranormals that are just a little bit different from those other 2010 paranormal romances, from a boy's perspective, it has a lot of different characters. It feels older than it is. There's no love triangle in this, but there is great platonic friendships and great side character development. I highly suggest you give this a try. My next recommendation is an adult dark fantasy romance, and that is A Ship of Bones and Teeth by Karina Halley. This is a dark Little Mermaid retelling, so you're probably wondering, where the hell do vampires fit in within this story? Trust me, they do. This is about Marin, who strikes a deal with a sea witch to trade her legs in return for falling in love with Prince Eric. But she has lived the past 10 years in this very abusive relationship with Eric, and she wants to get her fins back. So she sets out to track down the sea witch and get her revenge. Until her and Eric's ship is commandeered by Captain Ramsey, and he ends up unleashing her dark and dangerous side. And together, they are both tracking down this sea witch for their own reasons, and their romance evolves from there. This was a really fun book to read. It is a bit slow paced in the beginning, but once things turn a little murderous, things really amp up. I loved the chemistry between these characters. It's super spicy, and the vampires do make a prominent role in this story. I'm not going to tell you how, but they do. So enjoy this one. This next recommendation I'm just throwing in here because it is a quintessential vampire story. Twilight. Now, if you haven't read Twilight, I'm not going to try and sell you to read this because it would not live up to all of the plethora of better books out there, but it is a staple in the vampire book world. This is a book that kickstarted my love of reading, so I have to give it its props where its props are due. Edward and Bella. Edward is a 100-something-year-old vampire stuck in the body of a very gloomy, brooding 17-year-old boy. But it kickstarted my love of reading, so for that, I recommend it. And the last recommendation I have to share with you is another backlist, pretty standard vampire paranormal romance book. It sort of falls in line with the Midnight Breed series, although I did love the Midnight Breed series a lot more than this one. I still enjoyed this. And that is The Black Dagger Brotherhood by J.R. Ward. This is the first book in a very long and extensive series about the Black Dagger Brotherhood, who are this group of vampire warriors who are trying to protect their own kind and the humans from these creatures known as the Lessers. Now, don't ask me what the Lessers are because I haven't reread this series in so long. And quite honestly, whenever I read these books, I sort of skimmed over the parts where the Lessers were involved because I just didn't care. I was here for the romance between the couple and all that. So don't ask me the details of the extended plot within this story because I really couldn't tell you. But I did enjoy the first few books in this series because of the romantic relationships. And in here, we are following Wrath, who is the one and only last remaining pure blood vampire of the breed. And when his most trusted fighter dies, his fighter leaves behind this half-breed daughter who is about to go through the change to become a full-breed vampire. So he takes her under her wing and protects her, and in doing so, they form a relationship. So this is a very steamy series. It has great world building. It has a huge cast of characters. And I think if you are interested in picking this series up, you definitely should. I will say that I only read like the first 9 books of this series, and then it got to be so extendedly long that I gave up on it. But from what I can remember, the first like 6 were my favorite books of this series, and I would like to reread them at some point just to see if I still love them as much as I did. I mean, I keep holding on to these books like a decade plus later, so obviously they held some sort of importance to me. This wig, man, good God. If vampires are supposed to be cold to the touch, it is not me because I am sweating. So those were some of my favorite vampire book recs. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know down in the comments, have you read any of these, or what is your favorite vampire book? If you've made it this far in the video, could you leave me a little bat emoji? And be sure to check out the other collaborators on this recommendation and check out what they have to recommend for you today. So until my next video, thank you so much for watching, and go read a vampire book for me. Bye!